small farms. So I'm going to hand it over to Gail. She's joining us virtually. Hopefully that works.
Hello there. Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Great.
There, we see you. Hi, Gail.
Awesome. Okay, is my head really cut off, or is that just my view?
Look great.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Greetings. I'm here in Apollo Beach, Florida with my mom, so I couldn't join you today, but I'm delighted to be able to participate virtually in this amazing conference. And so the topic today, racial and social equity issues around the food value chain. And let me tell you a little bit about how I come to this work around equity. In 1997, I was a graduate student at The Ohio State University, and I had a conversation with my advisor about his work. Our very first meeting and our very first conversation, he had done his graduate work in Japan with rice growers. And the topic of Black farmers came up. And I honestly had no knowledge of what was happening with Black farmers in the US at that time. This was August of 1997. I left his office immediately because I said, the next time someone asks me a question about Black farmers, I need to have more to say than, gee, I don't know. So when I typed in, went immediately to the library with my backpack, just bookity, sat down and typed in Black farmers, and everything that came up said Pigford, Pigford, Pigford. I typed another Black farmers in the US, Pigford. And so I got really curious about this Pigford and Black farmers. Now I'm a cultural anthropologist by training, but I'm also very curious. So the first year, I think this was in 97, there was a conference in Detroit that a group of folks met to talk about the litigation that they wanted to move forward. So that's where I came in. And I was just very curious as to what was happening. Fast forward 5 years later, I ended up doing a dissertation on the sustainable agricultural traditions and adaptations of Black farmers in Ohio. So I didn't do like every good anthropologist or cultural anthropologist would do. I didn't go abroad. I was intending to go to Ecuador, but I stayed in Ohio and I talked to farmers throughout Georgia, Alabama, initially, and Ohio. Over the course of the last 23 years, I've talked to over 100 Black farmers. And so my knowledge and a lot of my expertise and wisdom has come from listening to stories about Black farmers. So what I'd like to do is sort of do a really quick historical kind of a look at how Black farmers fared post-Civil War. Of course, we know about the 200 plus years of forced labor with cotton and eventually with tobacco. But post-Civil War, the Black farmers, and there were from 1863 to like 1920, the data suggests that there were over 920 Black families operating farms within the US and operating over a little bit over 16 million acres of land. 12 million of those acres were actually being operated by people who were owning or part owners of the land. But most of the people that were operating those farms, about 60% were sharecroppers, okay? And so they were cropping cotton and tobacco. So here's some of the stories that I've heard farmers talk to me about their sharecropping tobacco experience. They would work for the 6 months or the season that cotton would last, usually about half a year. And then in December, they would take all the bales of cotton to the gin. And inevitably, and these are stories that I've heard more often than not, they would leave their cotton at the gin and they would leave without any money. The sharecropper farm owner would say that they had eaten it up, meaning between the 6 months that they were sharecropping and their children, in many cases, 10, 12 children, they had to borrow lard or borrow meat. And so the commissary gave them a bill. This is your receipt. And typically what happened when they went to the gin, they got no money for their working 6 months picking cotton and chopping cotton. Tobacco, another interesting story of how these farmers fared post-Civil War. Tobacco, Black farmers growing same golden tobacco that their counterparts were growing. But when they were taken to and was taken to the auction house and they were bidding, can I get 183? Can I get 193 for this cotton? I mean, for this tobacco. The auctioneer's hand would go down when Black farmers tobacco came up. So the white farmers were getting about 183, a dollar and 83 per pound per sheet, and Black farmers were getting about 130 and 140. And this was a general practice. Same golden corn, same golden tobacco, sometimes grown on the same land, because some of these farmers were sharecropping on land and sharing land with other white farmers who were also renting. Same inputs, but they got a different price for their cotton, for their tobacco. So those two commodities, just to sort of frame how we're looking at fairness and equity, there was really no fairness and no equity for Black farmers coming out of the Civil War and for the first 50 years, accumulating over 16 million acres. So the U.S. ag industry is really the friend of the big farmer. So big ag favors big growers. And Black farmers were and continue to be traditionally smallholders. They're small farm growers, 10, 20, 50, maybe 100 acres, but not enough to make a profit because of the profit margins growing in cotton in particular. And so they're paying more for their inputs and they're getting less for their products. And these are the exact words I could quote unquote what the farmers have said. They're paying more, but they're getting less for their products. And even when they want to increase their land acreage to buy more land or to buy tractors, they needed to go to the farms lending service to apply for a loan, and they didn't get those loans. And still today, Black farmers aren't able to get loans, and most farming entities have to borrow money. It is just the nature of the farming business. They have to borrow money, and historically, Black farmers have not been able to borrow money, and that is because of the racial and lack of equity issues across the U.S. ag industry. So these racial and lack of equity issues create a lot of health issues, mental and physical. For Black Americans, their lack of access to land has contributed to a lot of health outcomes, lack of access to culturally relevant foods. We call them legacy foods. These were the foods that are indigenous to West Africa, the foods that were grown and continue to be grown by Black farmers. These are the traditional foods that Black folks eat. And unless Black farmers are on the land, like purple hull peas and some of the okra, the different varieties of okra, Black community members aren't able to enjoy some of their food. So the lack of having Black farmers on their land, the lack of having land continues to create a very devastating fallout for Black communities, and the lack of having a Black farming community. One of the ways in which Black community members were able to survive during the Depression and all the hard times of not having enough money, they always had land and they had enough food. And I hear it all the time how people were penniless, but they were not starving. And that is a really interesting, fact, in that today people have more money, but they don't have enough food and they're still starving. And that, in my opinion, is related to not having access to land so that these farmers can grow the food and so that the farming communities can participate in this notion of sharing food and caring for each other. So Black health, the health of Black Americans will improve, and the whole country's health really improves when we have better outcomes to access food. One of the things, and this is why I was really, really excited about sharing the good news of what was going on with Black farmers, is the way in which they grow. Today, we're talking about regenerative agriculture, sustainable agriculture, we're dealing with issues of climate. Black farmers' practices are some of the most sustainable with regard to farming that we have as a record in the books around how people are farming. I've often the Black farmers that I talk to, they're winning these amazing ribbons for the cattle, for weight, for nutritional content, for their produce, their ingenuity. And these are the people that have taken to growing crops with a particular practice of taking care of the land. And so I was really incredibly excited when I would hear these stories and I would say, no one knows that these farmers are dealing with these issues, but that they are natural. They're not organic per se, because it's not a label that they've been certified by, but their practices are beyond organic when it comes to taking care of the soil, the land, the natural ecosystem, the local agro ecosystem, that they are intent on making sure that there's a lot of biodiversity. So we are, if we make sure that Black farmers can maintain their land, we are improving the agricultural traditions and the agricultural conditions in these agricultural communities. So improving the status and the capacity of Black farmers also improves the health outcomes for Black families and communities. And with regard to issues of equity, it really is an issue of humanity. I think we certainly, I hope that you all will agree with me that those 200 plus years of forced labor for African Americans was a blemish on this country. It showed that we didn't know how to do humanity very well. And so I think we're bearing witness now to these. This is a conversation, as a matter of fact, that we're talking about issues of racial and social equity, and we're talking about it in a transparent and open forum. But we have to know that before, the agricultural practices for hundreds of years have been very harmful. And so we want to bear witness to the ways in which we can be better humans, having better beings, having a human experience. And issues of equity actually allow us to be better as people on this planet. So I'm not going to go too much further. I have some time for questions, but here's some things that I think that could certainly improve the outcome and increase the equity. Staffing in a lot of these positions within the United States Department of Agriculture. Historically, those positions have been occupied by white men who have felt that it was their job to really protect the counterparts, the white counterparts. And so the staffing issue needs to change. There definitely could be a balance in that equity piece. We need to make sure that the people that are in these positions also look like the people that are farming and that are coming for support. The issue of reparations, to look at, say, for example, some of the landholders that have lost their land due to sort of the unfairness of the lending system. That needs to be addressed. The landholders their land has been taken. Even if they dare to vote, if you are a landowner and you dare to vote, you could potentially be lynched and your land taken. But people took that risk. But there were too many of those people that lost their lives. And so we've had a long road of unfairness with regard to agriculture. And I'm just using Black farmers because that's where I have a lot of experience and expertise and knowledge, listening to these farmers' stories. And I think the future of farming is a future that we embrace, a place for everyone, that we acknowledge the harms that were done. You know, if someone does something to you, in general, you look for an apology. And if they've taken something from you, you look for them to return it. So we're looking for the future of farming to imbue our country and the world with more equity, with the belief that everybody deserves equal access to farming, and especially if they're doing farming in a very holistic and natural way. We're looking at, changing. So the infrastructure, the sort of the system of ag, how the pricing and, you need to be big. That's the infrastructure. But we also want to look at the superstructure, the beliefs that those people who are in those positions to make the determination around who gets access to funding and who doesn't. That needs to change. We need to have a belief system that recognizes the contributions of everyone and the contributions of folks that have least been recognized, and that's Black farmers. And so I think those are the issues that we will be dealing with in the future. If we deal with them in the ways that are very productive, possibly in 50 years, we won't be talking about issues of equity. We'll be talking about how well we've done to correct hundreds of years of unfairness, and talking about the ways in which we are better beings, better humans on this planet, and treating everyone with the same love and care and respect that we want to be treated. So I will stop there and I'll wait for the question and answer period. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Gail. We'll have the question and answer after our next presentation. So I'll introduce Dwayne Goldman. I also learned he's from Iowa State University as an alum and just received the George Washington Carver Distinguished Service Award. So excited to hear more from him. He's a senior advisor for racial equity to USDA Secretary of Agriculture with more than 30 years of experience in the ag sector, and previously served as executive director of the National Black Growers Council. So welcome. Thanks for being here.
Wow. Good morning. To those that I can see here, and to those that can see me and I can't see you, I'll say good morning again. I want to thank Dr. Myers for I was feverishly taking notes. Not that I needed to take notes, but I wanted to remember all I could from her presentation. Because Dr. Myers, what you don't realize is a lot of those folk that you were talking about as you were doing your research at Ohio State, you could have been talking to my daddy. My grandfather, I'm a third generation farmer from Arkansas. Literally yesterday, we were a little behind on harvest. So when I got off work at 4 o'clock, my original plan was to head over to Dallas. But we were a man down, and so I spent a couple hours on a combine. Driving it, harvesting soybeans, and it was therapeutic. It always is. I love farming, but this is not about me. Those of you that are looking at the bio are saying that, wait a minute, he's lying. He's a senior advisor for racial equity, reporting to your fellow Iowan, my boss, Tom Vilsack, and that is true. But I'm going to take a page out of Gail's book, and I'm going to take you on a brief route to how I got here. And I want to share with you, first of all, that as a little country boy growing up in southeastern Arkansas, I had no intention of working for USDA. To be honest with you, I had no intention of working for a company. Never did. My sole and purpose, I wanted to farm. We grew up on a 300-acre farm, growing cotton and soybeans in the segregated South. I was born in 1963. I won't tell you how old I am. But 10 of 11 kids. And those folks that Dr. Myers described, that was us. I can remember very vividly when I realized that we were poor. I was about 15, 16 years old. And we grew most of the stuff we ate. We farmed, we had a little cash crop. Some years were better than others. But I can't relate to going to bed hungry or going to school hungry. I can't relate to that. I can relate to telling my older brother, take that shirt off and put an old shirt on, because that shirt's going to be handed down to me in a year or so because of the growth rates. And I like that one. So take that one off. Let's play in something else. That's just the way we rolled back then. Okay. But I hated it. I grew up, started chopping cotton when I was about 5 or 6. Those trips to the gin that she talks about were similar to me, except for third generation farmer. Both my maternal and paternal grandparents owned land. And so we owned land. We were not sharecroppers, we owned land. But those other things are very pertinent to me. When I got into high school, I started to question the science behind agriculture. Daddy, why do you plant this before this? Or why do you use this variety versus that one? And sometimes he would tell me, and sometimes he would say, go figure it out. So he instilled in me a quest for the science of agriculture. So by the time I graduated high school, my mind was made up. I was going to farm. I wanted to be a row crop farmer. I wanted to be one of those big guys that she talked about. So I go to the University of Arkansas. I graduate with a degree in agronomy, minor in ag economics, Dr. Coleman, and I'm on my way. But you can't start farming in May, so I took a position at the Extension Service. And in that position, I pretty quickly figured out that if I was going to have any decision-making authority, I would at least need an advanced degree. So I go back and I pursue a master's degree. And I obtained a master's in soybean breeding, and I really got turned on to the research, a deeper dive into the science of it. Decided to go on to Iowa State and get a PhD. Still had the farming bug, but by then my aim had shifted to being a professor. So to you professors in the audience, gentleman from Kentucky I had breakfast with this morning, that I was wanting to be one of your colleagues. But the industry came calling. And so I spent 30 years in the ag, chemical, and seed industry. And it's ironic that Dr. Myers talked about 1997, because that's the year I had been with Monsanto then. It was the second company. I'd been with Monsanto about 2 years. I was a technical manager for Roundup Ready soybeans. Some of you may have heard about that product. I had technical responsibility to support our agronomists and sales force across 17 southern states. And if you know anything about history and agriculture, you know that in the US, most of the Black farmers are situated in those 17 states. And it's not an accident. Most of those Black farmers, just like Dwayne Goldman, are descendants of slaves, and that's where the slaves worked. They did the manual labor for cotton and rice and tobacco, and so that's where they are. Just a fact, okay? But as I was traveling those 17 states and doing presentations and stuff, I would see Black farmers, and I would go up and talk to them out of curiosity, wanting to know what they grew, if they had any questions, wanted to break the ice, so they could have a one-on-one conversation with the technical manager for soybeans, and it served me well, okay? But the other thing it did was to start to reveal some of those things that Dr. Myers talked about. So I can recall in 1998, and I'm going somewhere with this, I'm not just rambling. I can recall in 1998, audience about a room about the size of this, except for it's in my backyard. It's at the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff. It's their small farmers conference. which most of the 1890 land-grant universities have a similar conference. But this one is a little different for Dwayne Goldman because it's in my backyard. I know 3/4 of the audience intimately, have been on their farm, played with their kids, probably stolen their melons out of the field or something. You know, I know these folk, okay? And I'm talking to them, and I can see people looking at me now, but as I'm talking to these people, they're kind of looking at the wall, they're saying, and I'm like, what's going on? Y'all are not with me. What's happening? And so I'm talking about by then, 2 years of pretty astounding benefits from the Roundup Ready soybean technology. And they said, hey, Dr. Goldman, Dwayne, Curtis's boy, Bobby's son, this may be true for your large farmers, but we don't grow 1,000 acres of soybeans. We only got 20. We only have 10. We only have 40. So those benefits you're talking about don't apply to us. And I said, I'm not quite sure I understand, because what I'm showing you is per acre benefits. But yeah, they say you got to be of a certain size to be able to capture those benefits. And I did an audible, blind wild hog finding an acorn audible right in the middle of my presentation. And I said, stop. And I said, Dr. English, I'm going to count on you to help me figure it out. I'm going to come up with some money some kind of way. And I said, I want you to do these same demonstrations on the farms that are in this room today. I want about a dozen of them. And I said, we'll figure it out. And I said, next year when I come back, I want to share the results from those dozen demonstrations. We did it. And guess what? Those farmers were right. The benefits were not the same on their farm. But this is the naked truth too. They were better. The benefits were better simply because effective weed control was a more limiting factor on their operations because of the other things that the agricultural system had cut them out of. And so we immediately saw a shift to the technology, but that's not the success story. Hell, Monsanto's gonna be fine anyway, you know? The success story is the fact that we were able to reach those farmers where they were, and it made a pivotal impact on my view of what equity in agriculture really means. I didn't know it then, okay? So fast forward, I go on to, do a lot of things at the company, spend a little time in government affairs, spend a little time in HR working on outreach. And midway through, we came across an issue. And Black farmers were thrust in the middle of that issue. Monsanto was getting ready to buy a cottonseed company. It was actually an old cotton plantation, which I had a particular distaste for, because those plantations had left Black farmers out of the system for far too long, I thought, and this was a chance to right some wrongs. But Black farmers were thrown in the middle of that. Long story short, Gary Madison, you know what I'm talking about. So instead of trying to respond to the accusation, I told our management, if we can't respond to, if we respond to the allegation, it's going to be big company versus this accusation, and you're just going to get in a, hello ladies, a urinating contest, and nobody's going to win, right? And so we said, what we should do is try and develop a group of Black farmers that we can talk to candidly to advise us on this issue, as well as other issues that are about to come. Long story short, that became the National Black Growers Council, which I advised for the last 10 or so years of my career, learned a lot from, served as executive director last year, 2020. And let's talk about 2020, because we're now coming close to racial equity, okay? Let's talk about 2020. So my last trip outside the county in 2020, I think, Ms. Spate, was the end of February. I was on the Policy Center Advisory Board. I decided to go virtual because the numbers were rising. We had a gripping pandemic that pretty much shut down the country. In the middle of that pandemic, we saw some racism and violence and discrimination and bias and other things that manifested themselves that I honestly thought as an American that we were beyond. Lo and behold, we were not. And so by the time we get to election time in 2020, the country is saying, we've got to do better on certain fronts. Joe Biden was elected president. Kamala Harris, for the first time, Black, Indian, female vice president. And all of a sudden, certain things that had been kind of swept under the rug started being talked about more. Climate. How do we respond in agriculture in a climate that's a little warmer, a little drier, a little wetter, a little more extreme? How do you respond to that across the agricultural sector? Equity. What do we do about equity? What do we do about these people that have been left out of the system for far too long, when the mandate is that we need to make sure that everyone, regardless of what you're growing, everyone needs to operate at peak efficiency in order to feed a growing population with changing dietary preferences. So it's not about big versus small, or Black versus white, or organic versus traditional, or biotech versus something else. It's about all of those things being done responsibly to create more, to feed more, to sustain ourselves. Equity. And so by the time the president was putting his cabinet together, as the story was told to me, he wanted Tom Vilsack to come back in for an unprecedented third term as Secretary of Agriculture. Secretary Vilsack had served 2 terms under President Obama, which is kind of unusual because those guys usually will serve, what, 1 term, maybe a portion of a term, and then they go on to greener pastures. But Secretary Vilsack was convinced to come back for an unprecedented third term. And he came back with certain mandates that weren't there under the first 2. One of those was racial equity. President Biden, on the first day in office, issued EO, Executive Order 13985, which talked about racial justice and equity for underserved communities. And he gave his cabinet level appointees a little bit of latitude as to how they chose to accomplish those mandates. And Secretary Vilsack said for the first time, he would name a senior advisor for racial equity. I'm sorry, but here's what you got. Okay? So let me tell you a little bit about what's going on at the department. And again, I'm building off Dr. Myers, okay? Everything she said was true. Can't disagree with any of it. But there's a little bit more that I want you to understand that brings relevance to what she said, okay? We're talking about agriculture. We're not talking about a profession where if we're running a race and we both start from here, you give us equal resources and this is a finish line. No, we're not talking about that. We're talking about a situation that is very capital intensive, kind of generational, where done correctly, each successive generation gets to build on the successes of the prior generation. That's agriculture. We want our kids to do a little better than we did. They come in, they take the farm. In most cases, they expand it. They keep up with technology. If you're in that group that's included, there's a system there for you. But what if you're not in that group? What if you're in Dwayne Goldman's situation, where my daddy dare not go in and question why his loan was delayed, denied, dare not try and vote to put someone on the county committee that would represent his interest? Just not going to happen, okay? What do you do about those people? Because this is a capital intensive profession where, what I said, successive generations get to build on the successes of the prior generation. Unless for certain people, you have the misfortune of being in that group that's excluded. And in that case, successive generations have to atone for, account for, compensate for the fact that their forefathers were left out of the discussion. So all of a sudden, you find yourself talking about equity in a profession that's highly unequal. And so if we're picking apples and the apples are right here, and I'm a foot short and you put a foot box underneath me, I can reach the apples, right? But if there's a person standing beside me that's a foot shorter than I am, and you give him or her a foot tall box, they're still a foot shorter to go. We've got a lot of people that equality is not going to work because they're more than a foot away from the goal. So what we have to do in terms of equity, what we have to do is responsibly account for the differences, the shortages, the fact that people have been overlooked, and address those things so that we can get people to a point of equality so we can start focusing on equity. And that's the goal behind this. Let me share with you just a few things, and I won't be long either. I'll try and talk about some of the key things that we've done. So I started March 1. Didn't intend to, but I started March 1. Thank you, Courtney. And on day one, we started talking about what this equity looks like at USDA. And we realized that, you know what? In order for us to be serious about this, there are certain things that we're going to have to recognize. We're going to have to recognize those inequities. We're going to have to recognize the fact, Dr. Myers talked about it, we have a system that disproportionately rewards the ones that can keep up with the modern trends. So we've got to continue to support those people that want to adopt technology quickly, be more efficient, do it sustainably, continue to grow. But we've also got to step back and reach those people that have been left out, that need a lift up so that they can be more competitive. So we've got to figure out a way, and we've done it. If you look at CFAP, the second round, when we pulled back and said, look, we've got a situation where 99% of the resources are going to 90% of the population. Minority farmers have garnered only about 1%. And we said, we've got to pull back and come out with a system that's more equitable. And we did that. And I think we made some accomplishment, but it doesn't stop there. Okay, there's other things that we've got to do. So we engage in a cross-departmental racial equity group. Dr. Myers talked about a situation where, and I heard Senator Booker say it, it can't be about us without us. So if you don't have the right people advocating for the people that you're trying to help, it's going to come across as disingenuous, it's going to be ineffective. We need to make sure, and this is one of those working groups, the internal working group that's taking a deep look at USDA's internal makeup to make sure that we are representative of the people we're trying to help, okay? There's an external working group that's looking, taking a deep dive at those programs, trying to understand why bigger gets more, or what are some of the nuances behind the reward system, and how can we better tweak that to make sure that regardless of what you're growing, if you're an organic producer or small animal producer, if USDA is going to support agriculture, we need to figure out a way to do that. We've got some pretty innovative programs that we're implementing to do exactly that. There's a group focused on procurement and contracting. The federal government buys a lot of stuff from farmers and agricultural producers. And we need to make sure that that system is more equitable, and you'll see some things rolling out on that one. Should have about 2 minutes left. And I want to talk about this Equity Commission. So the Federal Register notice went out September 27th, talking about an Equity Commission. This Equity Commission is in place to help USDA get and this will be external experts. You can go to the Federal Register notice. I'll make sure we get that for you. And it'll show you the composition of it. We've already decided, USDA, Secretary Vilsack has already decided that we're going to do the Equity Commission, which will be a broad umbrella type steering commission that will provide external oversight to the department. It'll be advisory in nature. But we know we have some problems in our ag production programs. So simultaneously, we are creating an agriculture subcommittee. The agriculture subcommittee, the steering commission, the Equity Commission will be 15 experts, CBOs, legal minds, historians, economists, that will provide oversight, broad direction. The agriculture subcommittee will actually report to the Equity Commission, but it'll be more specific for those agriculture programs, kind of a boots on the ground look at how these agriculture programs are reaching the intended audience. I would hope that some of you in here, if you're representing whatever kinds of farmers, large, small, that you would think seriously about who you would want representing the interests of those farmers on this commission. And I would encourage you to nominate someone that can do that. We are looking for that. The nomination period will end next week, October 27th. We already have a team assembled of some of our leaders at USDA that will decide on the list of folks that will be presented to the secretary for eventual selection. We're looking at 15 people on the commission, an additional 13 on the subcommittee, and 2 members from the commission will also serve on the agriculture subcommittee. Deputy Secretary Dr. Joy Bernal will co-chair the subcommittee, the Equity Commission, along with a person to be selected from the 15 nominations, and a designated federal officer will manage the day-to-day operations of that. So those are kind of the highlights. I'll follow Gail's lead again and stop and try and address any questions you may have.
Is this on?
Hi, I'm Vanessa Willing. I'm from Nebraska, Nebraska Extension. And one thing that I'm a dietitian, so I come from the consumer world, so I'm still learning about production and farming. One thing that I find gets used interchangeably is we talk about food and we talk about agriculture kind of interchangeably, but then I realized that a lot of our agriculture is not about food, but we like to, I don't know, pretend that it is or assume that it is. What % of USDA resources are actually going to programs and producers producing food for human consumption versus not? And are we considering separating those areas so we can get a more transparent picture of how much our country is actually investing in the future of food and food production?
Why y'all clapping? Because she stumped me?
Yeah. I
Thank-
don't think you need this. But we got my back.
Thank you, Vanessa. I'll have to get back with you, Vanessa. Great question. I honestly don't know the percentage. I will push back just a little bit though. Because in the conversations that I'm in now, the USDA is a huge organization. And those things that one, agriculture addresses food and feed. That feed comes back to hit us in protein production, yeah. And so a lot of that is, but there's a growing interest in programs that support more direct marketing opportunities particularly for fresh fruits and vegetables, maybe nuts. And so the secretary is leading us through a pretty interesting exercise where we look at how we provide incentives for those programs. I don't know what that percentage is, but I'll get back to the conference leaders on this, Courtney. But I will say that this disproportionate support, particularly the commodity programs, we see that changing some, because agriculture, and it's interesting you said you're a dietitian. I happen to be married to one, and she's grilled me a lot over the food programs, and what we're doing. And so there's a lot being placed there. USDA does manage a lot of the school lunch programs, nutrition guidelines, those things, and there's a lot of effort being done there. And so I would expect to see, in the short term, I would expect to see some changes in the way those are managed. When you start talking about separating out, and this discussion, Gary, you're a political guy, kinda, you keep your hand on the pulse, but about every other farm bill, it comes to a pretty heated debate, whether you're gonna pull the SNAP benefits out of the farm bill, for instance. And the risk in that, one, you could say that, yeah, maybe that gives you a focus, but the risk in that, when you pull those out, there's a disassociation that could quickly happen between food and the public that we're trying to feed. And I think that disconnect, I can see more disadvantages for having that disconnect than advantages. And so I'm of the opinion that we need to continue to tout the benefits of the whole agricultural system, including how we feed ourselves, how we support those who need support. And this is coming from a guy, I'll say it, probably the only one in the cage, as we call it, that got food stamps at one time in their life. But when you're 10 of 11 kids and you're poor and you don't know it, and you can get food stamps. My dad was a veteran, and we got food stamps. And it changed kind of the way we think, because all of a sudden we had stuff that we didn't have before, like cookies instead of tea cakes. And they weren't necessarily better, but for, 7, 8-year-old kid, it's like, wow, okay, here we go, So yeah, but that disassociation, I would rather have the discussion about how we support a total food system than to spend a lot of time pulling it apart because of that. Because if we lose that, I think we're going to lose a vital part of agriculture that still pays dividends.
Yeah, I don't think
Awesome. I'm gonna,
in the farm bill, I think they should have like more, like the internal structure to be a little bit more obvious on who's working on food versus who's working on fuel and environment.
Okay, understood.
thanks for your question. I'm gonna open it up. I believe someone's following the chat online too. I want to make sure that we hear from those participants. Erica, are you able to unmute if there's any questions online to take next for either of our presenters?
Should I sit down or get up? Or what should I do?
Whatever you prefer.
Okay.
And if we don't hear an unmuted, I'll hand it over to someone else in here. Okay, we'll go Jody.
Okay,
next,
yes,
and
I'm
then-
able to unmute.
there we
Good
go.
morning, good morning. So Ms. Summer asks, will the Equity Commission have a representation from the territories? That includes Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and American Samoa.
So if you don't get us a nomination, we won't. And I say that, let me be very clear here. Oh, that's Erica. How you doing, man? We are looking for geographical, racial, experiential diversity. And so we do need that lens to be represented, okay? I would encourage anyone that's listening, anyone in the audience, if you know someone from the territories or the islands that have that, please get them to me. And Ms. Fields, can you put my contact info in the chat somewhere so that people will know? You can send them directly to me and I'll make sure. It's dwayne.goldman@usda.gov. And my number is 202-997-2100 in case someone has additional questions. But if you can get that to the audience, I certainly would appreciate it. Good to see you. Yeah.
Thank you. We'll go to Jody next.
Good morning. Thank you so much. Jody Anderson, Alaska Extension. I would like to kick the ball back to Gail if she's still on. Gail, would you tell us a little bit about the work you're doing in Oakland and maybe also about your farmers market, please?
Oh, yes, be glad to. We started the Farms to Grow organization in 2004 as a way to stand in the gap. When I graduated, I saw too many gaps with regard to services and resourcing. So we do several things. We have a farmer development program where we go and do technical assistance directly to farmers. We have a Freedom Farmers Market going on its 9th year. And this is the only place in California where you can find on every Saturday a Black farmer from Fresno or Gwenda, or we have an urban farmer that we're working with in Oakland. So we have a Freedom Farmers Market. We also have a Gardens to Grow program where we provide volunteers to farmers. We bring at least 30 volunteers every week to a different farmer. Usually it's on a Wednesday or a Sunday for our urban growers. We have a George Washington Carver, what we're calling a circling back and a STEAM program where we go into schools and community centers and we take our microscopes and peanuts and plants and materials, and we have our lab coats, and we're docents in these places, and we let kids look under the microscope and ask questions about George Washington Carver. We have a young chefs farmers program where we work with youth. And this program usually takes place during the summer. But we had a program in San Francisco that lasted 5 years. Every Thursday, we worked with a third grade class of girls, and then we worked with boys, teaching them cooking. And but a lot of our work really is building up the confidence, the capacity of our farmers. It's bringing back our Black farming, Black residents in Oakland and other communities and where we're serving our farmers, so that they can have this memory of all the foods that are traditional foods. Like we have a Crowder pea shelling contest at our Freedom Farmers Market. But our idea is to take away the shame. You know, there's a lot of shame that has been associated with Black farming. In particular, there's certain crops like watermelon. We have a watermelon eating contest. And so we want to reconnect that memory, that place that people know, that they identify in a wholesome way, that who they are. They're land-based people. And so we are bringing back this notion that you ought to be able to grow your food. You should know who grows it if you don't grow it, and be close to the land. And our programs really are to make sure that we got the next generation in the pipeline. We don't want to keep missing this generational wealth. We lost a whole lot of generational wealth when we lost these farms. People couldn't pass this on to their generations. Dr. Goldman mentioned that. But we want to make sure that that piece stops right here, that we are able to see our farmers pass on their farm and have a succession. We work with one farmer. We've been working with him for about 12 years. And he's often said that he has a son and a daughter, and neither one of them want to farm. Well, recently, over the last few years, as we have helped him expand from he had a 40-acre farm and he was only growing on 3 acres. So right now he's growing on 20 acres. His son and daughter are both now fighting over who's going to get the farm because they can see some hope. We're working with him to get into Stanford. And so that procurement program that Dr. Goldman mentioned, we're working to make sure that our farmers can have access and opportunities where there were not before. So that's really what we're about, opening doors where they had otherwise been closed.
Thank you, Gail. We have time for one more question if you want to go last.
Okay, I wish I could say it's an easy one, but and my question's not going to be near as concise and well put together, but I want to appreciate everything, how nuanced this conversation is, and how this is just scratching the surface of kind of the history of how we got to where we are right now. And I think a lot of times when, especially when I was first starting in local food, working in local food systems, trying to explain what I do, it was basically trying to say, I'm just trying to get people to pay more money for food. Like, that's what I'm trying to do here. If people could just pay more money for their food, all the problems would be solved. And that creates a lot more issues, we know, with nutrition and things like that. And where does that go back to? And that goes back to even, before slavery in the colonies. That goes back to, England finding the colonies to grow food elsewhere for cheaper. And, why anyone right now is struggling in farming goes back to us not paying the full price of our food, of the labor that goes into it. And when you look at when the USDA was created in 1862 and the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, what was going on in our country in that time? And even some of the plantations that were no longer able to operate with the Emancipation Proclamation, those farms went to Brazil and they went to other global places to get cheaper labor. And so the USDA has done so much to rectify that. I think most of us have a job thanks to the work that they're trying to do to rectify that. But it's been over 100 years, it's been centuries that we're working at it. And so what my question is we can talk about these innovative programs and we can get down and figure out the difference between how much money is being allocated towards food and how much money is being allocated towards other products. But what are we doing to work more innovatively together to overturn what's been going on for centuries? And that's, food not being valued, food not being paid enough. Like, how can we, all the money that we're getting to do this work for people to tell their stories, to increase the value of food, how can we be working better together, working better with the USDA
to make the money that we do get go further?
So very great question. And we're out of time. Just kidding. Totally kidding. How about we give Gail a minute for a response and then we'll turn over to Dr. Goldman and that's how we'll wrap up. So Gail, I'll give that to you first.
Yeah, I think Dr. Goldman actually laid out the, what Secretary Vilsack is attempting to do with these commissions and representing a broad population is a good start. But I think the very first thing that we're doing also is acknowledging that there have been errors and that we continue to, be very clear and very transparent about that and have the door open, have venues, have, opportunities for people to enter feedback and contribute their thoughts around this. But it has to be an open process. And I think we've already started. This particular panel is a start. I mean, your question, engaging an audience is a start. We couldn't have probably had this conference, this panel maybe 10 years ago. And hopefully 10 years from now, there will be a more refined question about how are we really, fine tuning these solutions. But I think that within the public, with these councils, with these panels, I think we need discussions in our classrooms. We need to be able to bring this feedback up to the top. And I welcome the way in which Secretary Vilsack is really, in my mind, trying to make an amends for some of the behavior, some of the things that happened during his administration. And I think it's a good time. It's a really good time to be talking about this. And I'm very optimistic. And I think that we're going to make some inroads that we weren't able to do before.
Ditto. I mean, your question, ma'am, Miss Nebraska, I think, Vanessa, and yours are very pertinent. And we're thinking about those daily. But to Dr. White's point, these are big problems. The good thing is Dwayne Goldman, Tom Vilsack, we don't have to figure it out ourselves. We're going to count on you to help us figure it out. So a transparent, participatory process. And I think we'll get to a point where we'll say, yes, we don't have it perfected yet, but we've made significant progress along these lines. And that's what we're trying to do here. I mean, this thing, one of the problems, if you will, with our food system is that it's pretty efficient. When you look at the number of people that a single person can feed, it's pretty efficient. Now, there are some things that are not working real well, but overall, I would argue that it's pretty efficient. But we need to start focusing on those things that need improving. And it'll take a lot of brilliant minds to come in and figure it out. But I see some significant progress being made. Thanks for the opportunity to visit with you.
All right, before you all get to your next sessions, I have a couple announcements. And this goes for folks online too. Give us a few minutes to get downstairs for those next breakout sessions. So all concurrent sessions are moving downstairs now. If you were planning on being in Valverde, that is now a night catcher. That goes for the whole rest of the day. And then lunch is going to be in Windfall, which is over there. And so everyone online joining us, there should have been a session handout that will give you the appropriate links. All of those will remain the same, but we'll plan to start those in about 5 minutes or so to give you time to get situated. So thank you again to our presenters.
And you said Windfall is line catcher.
Windfall for lunch, night catcher for the sessions, light catcher. Yes.
I need Gail White's contact.
Yes.
I need that. I'm heading to California.
I'm French from Mexico. I know Joel called me. I don't know. I'll email you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
I made it back.